Alright, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to talk about Brock Purdy and why he is already being crowned as the best 49ers QB since Steve Young, and why I am ready to crown him as the best 49ers quarterback since Steve Young. But before we talk about him and before we get into the video, leave a like if you enjoy, or as I always say, you can wait until the end and hopefully I will have earned it. And subscribe because I'll be making these kinds of videos about the NFL all offseason long. So, Brock Purdy came into the NFL as just another 7th round pick in a remarkably weak quarterback class. Or at least that's what it seemed like. But how ironic is it that the most valuable player, the most valuable asset to the NFL, to an NFL team in that whole 2022 draft class, was Mr. Irrelevant. I know that draft had some absolute studs like Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, Derek Stingley, Sauce Gardner, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Kyle Hamilton, Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, his college teammate Breece Hall, and many more. But Brock Purdy is easily the most valuable asset from that entire draft. Just pure terms and how valuations work in the NFL, there is no sort of price on a 24-year-old bona fide stud franchise quarterback making only $1 million against the salary cap for the next 2 years. But let's look at why he fell so far in the draft, because it's not like his college resume is unimpressive. Statistically, it's actually pretty solid. Nothing world-beating like 30 touchdowns and 4 picks or anything like that. He actually broke the record for most wins as an Iowa State quarterback, as well as the best passer rating for a freshman quarterback in Iowa State history. It's just a bonus that he got drafted to a place decently close to home for him when he finally did leave Iowa State. But let's talk about how he was as an Iowa State quarterback. So I've looked at a few Iowa State Reddit boards and forums back when Purdy was coming into the NFL draft in 2022, and it seems like Iowa State fans thought the world of Brock Purdy as a person, but they got tired of him throwing picks on a potential game-winning drive. But from a deep dive into 2021 Iowa State football, that offensive line was absolutely garbage, so I can see why he felt the need to play hero ball. A lot of Iowa State fans and people who followed the draft when he was picked in the 7th round were thinking, all right, he's a career backup. And reading The Athletic in their article of an anonymous team's scouting report on Brock Purdy coming into the NFL, the strengths for Purdy were that he was very experienced with 48 college starts and that he managed the game well, made the routine play, he was creative as the play extended, and he worked through his progressions. The weaknesses, saw it off, not a very good athlete, limited arm both in strength and throw repertoire. So he has limited athleticism, but I think his speed was fine. He ran a 4.85, which is exactly what Patrick Mahomes ran. And Mahomes isn't like a designed run weapon, but he is a weapon being an escape artist. So Brock Purdy's speed was fine. And everything else about his profile, athletically, regarding Purdy was relatively uninspiring. And in the era of football where the biggest trendy thing now is how nuclear can a quarterback go just based on his athleticism alone, Purdy has such a great mental game to the point where he doesn't need to be the biggest, fastest, or strongest guy. And a lot of NFL scouts penciled him as maybe a Chase Daniel, a Ryan Fitzpatrick, a Josh McCown type who have never been good enough to start week 1 on an NFL team, but not good enough to stay the starter. And that's no disrespect. Even the average player, D1 college football player from the SEC, doesn't even reach the point of getting meaningful snaps on an NFL field. And if he is a backup quarterback, good for him. Those Chase Daniel, Fitzmagic, and McCown types have made nearly $40 million, at least in Daniel's case, to not have their body beat to death or have permanent head trauma. So if that's all he is, he's doing better than 99.99999% of the world. But to put things lightly, he's exceeded that in a big way. And he was also in a plus situation considering the archetype of the 49ers and the whole offensive ecosystem. But let me get one thing straight. Yes, the 49ers are undoubtedly a great system for any young quarterback to be in. Great team and very quarterback friendly. Yes, Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, and then adding McCaffrey midway through the year in 2022 is unquestionably the best group of skill position players top to bottom in the entire league. But we have seen way too many quarterbacks struggle in Kyle Shanahan 49er offenses to the point where we cannot call Purdy just a merchant of his situation. One example of this was Jimmy Garoppolo. Nobody can tell me with a straight face that Jimmy Garoppolo played well after that 2019 Super Bowl run they had. They were actually planning on moving on from Garoppolo in that 2022 offseason, the same offseason they drafted Purdy, but being ended up being unable to because of his shoulder injury, and I highly doubt there was a legit market for him at that point. So he gets drafted, Purdy gets drafted in the 2022 draft, 7th round, literally the very last pick of the draft. So the 49ers are trying to move on from Jimmy G, but situations are pretty fluid in the NFL. And when he was drafted to the 49ers, he had a quarterback ahead of him on the depth chart who the team just traded up for using 3 first-round picks to get because they thought they had their guy. But in that very offseason, Purdy caught the eye of Kyle Shanahan in training camp. Kyle Shanahan told Jed York in the first week of training camp in July that Brock Purdy may have been the team's best quarterback. And telling that to a higher-up after you traded 3 firsts to get who you thought was your quarterback of the future, that's rather unideal to say the least. So the season plays out. Lance starts week 1 in a hurricane, and then the very next game snaps his ankle in half on a design QB run. Garoppolo comes in, and he had some good performances against some bottom feeder teams, I won't deny it. But he also had a few disasters, particularly against the Broncos and against the Chiefs, and people were just weirdly talking themselves into him again. But then Garoppolo also gets hurt, and from there on out, Brocktober began. But it was in December. They went absolutely nuclear to end the year. So not only did Purdy throw 11 touchdowns to 2 interceptions, but he threw for 1,000 yards and led the 49ers to over 30 points a game. I think the first time people really noticed him, and not only noticed him because he had been a big talking point of the NFL at that time, but respected how well he had played, was when the 49ers stormed back in the wild card game against Seattle. And he made that unbelievable scramble play. And had IU held on, this is arguably the best red zone play in NFL history. The offense left a lot to be desired against the Cowboys, and he got hurt against the Eagles in the NFC Championship, and they literally just ran out of quarterbacks. Nothing more, nothing less. So he tore his UCL in the NFC Championship game, which I don't know if that entailed Tommy John surgery necessarily, and I don't know how his recovery actually worked, because that's kind of irrelevant to this. But here's a little known fact about the 49ers that just seemed to get glossed over. Kyle Shanahan tried to get Tom Brady last offseason. And I get the logic behind it. At the time last year when these rumors were floating around, I thought there was no substance to them, but Kyle Shanahan came out at some point this year and said, yeah, that was valid. And I thought it was just people who were delusional and trying to talk themselves into a 46-year-old Brady. He was still a good quarterback with Tampa last year, but at the end, it just seemed like he was very clearly declined and nowhere close to the Brady of old. So coming into the offseason, it's still widely believed that Trey Lance was going to be given the opportunity to win the starting job back. That did not come to fruition, not even close to it. Lance actually played himself out of a job and then got traded to the Cowboys, allowing Darnold to be the number 2 quarterback and with Purdy as the number 1 entering week 1 against Pittsburgh. The 49ers came out in 2023 absolutely swinging. And this year they ran a more complex offense. Purdy had a full offseason of being the starter. Granted, not fully recovered for a lot of it, but the mental part of Purdy's game is what's wildly impressive, and it's what has sold me on him being a quarterback of the future. A pre-snap Kyle Shanahan offense is one of the most complicated things to run in the NFL. You have to diagnose a defense very well. You have to use a lot of motion. There are a lot of checks, and yes, that goes for any offense, but especially in the Shanahan offense. But going 5-0, and in this time period, the 49ers went 5-0 their first 5 games of the 2023 season. Purdy threw 9 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. Most of the touchdowns were taken up by Christian McCaffrey. So yeah, there wasn't a lot of touchdown production, but he didn't need to, at least through the air. He didn't need to throw. He didn't need to pass for more touchdowns. This team, top to bottom, was absolutely loaded. Purdy, after the first 5 weeks of the season, was getting genuine MVP buzz. They did hit a bump in the road midway through the year against the Browns, against the Bengals, and the MVP buzz did die down once they had that absolutely embarrassing Monday night loss against the Ravens. But make no mistake about it, he had arrived. Every other game this year, he was money. A few games did not go smooth, especially in playoff time, as the 49ers came out in the divisional round against the Packers and the Lions and just couldn't get enough going on the offensive side of the ball. But Purdy played well in the playoffs, all things considered, besides that first half against Green Bay. And in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, they just simply ran out of gas. Their offensive line just fell apart against a great Chiefs defense, and there's not much more to it. But regardless of what happened this playoff run, regardless of why Ayuk did not get hit in the back of the end zone in that critical overtime play, which, by the way, not Purdy's fault. That is 1,000% his O-line's fault. This guy has arrived, and it is very clear that he's one of the best in the game, and I'm jealous of 49er fans that they get this guy for their future. It didn't matter that he was undersized. It didn't matter that he was relatively, compared to other NFL quarterbacks, unathletic. It didn't matter that he wasn't seen as having tons of upside in the NFL. The thing that sets Purdy apart is his mental game. A lot of quarterbacks don't have it. Trey Lance didn't have it. Garoppolo didn't have it. And now he's the spearhead and the biggest cog in the machine that is the 49ers offense. So that does it for me, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.